What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Pat Cave. Got another video for you today. So just a slight overview. My dad, if you haven't seen my video on the customized McFarlane gold label Batmobile, my dad customized one of those for my birthday last year and I went and picked it up. And we did a video where he's showing me all the customizations he did on the car. And then we decided after that we wanted to do a Batwing that was to scale. And we found the Gambody 3D files. He had started printing the parts for that in my last video. And I had given the percentage that it was increased, but it turns out that was wrong. So I apologize for that. The correct percentage is going to be scaled to 160% for the Batwing. And you know, he tried a few different sizes for the this is for to scale to the 1/12 Mezco Batman figure from the 1989 Michael Keaton version of Batman. He printed a few different size chairs. I go over all that in my first video, and it ended up being that, you know, that he finally found the correct scale, and I mistakenly put the wrong scale in the last video, so I'm sorry about that. I think that I want to say that the files originally come in like a 1/16 scale. So we had to scale it up and trying to figure it out. It's kind of funny because the Mezco Batman's 1/12 scale, but we did a 1/12 scale up of the Batwing from those files and it was too small. So it's actually closer to 1/10 scale, but 160% scale up is what you're going to want if you're trying to make one of these that's to scale to the Mezco Batman figure. So we started with a resin printer. In the pictures I showed you last time, that's what he was using. And it turns out that those parts required a lot of extra steps and it's heavy. Anyone that has printed with resin can tell you that. So he ended up getting a second 3D printer, and this one can print the parts a lot bigger. So the Batwing has some really big pieces of it, chunks of it, the fuselage, you know, the cockpit piece, the wings, all that stuff's pretty big. And this can print up to 20 inches, I believe he said, or right under, a shade under 20 inches. So he ended up getting the second printer in PLA. And I was a little bit hesitant about that because I've seen a lot of PLA prints and I wasn't too big a fan of the way they've turned out, and I've always heard bad things about the quality. Thankfully, you know, I was a little skeptical, I will admit that. Printing has come a long way, I guess, and it just, you know, who's doing it, I guess, is important because I've bought a lot of prints in the past that were PLA and they just didn't look that great. They had a lot of stepping lines and the, you know, layer lines, and I didn't like that. I mean, if you want to sit there and do a lot of sanding and you don't mind it, that's one thing, but I don't like having to do all the extra steps, especially for parts that are really detailed. So he ended up getting that PLA printer and he did a test print, and to my surprise, you know, it actually looked really, really good. You could hardly see any of the lines on it, the layer lines, and I think he did a little bit of light sanding. He started over, basically reprinting all of the parts that he had previously done with the resin printer, and I think that this one's turning out really good, and he's printed all the pieces that he needs so far. I don't know if there's any parts left that he really needs to print. The one thing we didn't end up printing from the Gambody files was the stand, because I don't really care for that design where it's like a chunk of it looks kind of like rock underneath and it's got that rod. I just don't really care for that, and I need to figure out a different way to mount it in here anyways, because there's not enough space to just set it flat on the surface. I'll need to either suspend it from wires or something from the ceiling, or I'm thinking of building a stand that go up above me, above my bookcases up there. So stay tuned for how that turns out. I'm gonna have to be very careful because obviously it's, you know, going to be large and it's going to be fragile. So if it falls off, it will probably explode. So let's go ahead and start with the parts. He sent me a lot of pictures. He's doing this down in, you know, LA. I live in Northern California, so I'm going to go down there and pick this up basically the last weekend of May, and I'll have to, you know, pick it up and transport it. It's too big to ship. I mean, you could ship it, but it'd probably cost a fortune. It would probably break. So he started reprinting all the files again, and you can see here how well everything fits together. He kind of went step by step, did, you know, I think he started with the fuselage was the first part, which is the big part that the cockpit kind of fits into. And he told me that it slides into there too. He's got the lights kind of sort of set up too, and the wings. I'll put a little picture of that too, so you can see how there's two white LEDs in the front of the wings. And I kind of looked pretty closely, both of us did, at the pictures of the, you know, the studio scale model to see what was actually lit up. I used the Jazz Ink Batwing, which is awesome too, for a lot of reference, because I think that's pretty damn close to how it actually looked. I think it's actually more fancy than the studio scale model was on the interior where Batman sits with all the lights. And you know, one thing I should note is that there's not a whole lot of room at the scale that we did this at to put a whole lot of lights in the cockpit, just because of how tiny everything is. So I know he's going to do a couple, but he also said the fuselage isn't able to be removed once it's put, you know, the cockpit's pushed into there. There's just no give, and there is tunnels running through the wings and through the parts to be able to run the wiring behind the chair, which is where the battery pack goes. He figured out all the lighting himself. I can't take any credit for that. I'm very bad with wiring. That's one thing I've never learned in all my hobby days is how to do wiring. I don't think it's particularly hard, it doesn't sound like, but I just haven't really ever had a project where I've done it myself where I needed like a lot of lights. But so he ended up printing the fuselage, he did the cockpit, and you know, you saw how well Batman fits in there. Probably wondering about the size. So by the time all of the parts are printed, the fuselage, the cockpit, all the pieces of the wings, I think he said that the wingspan was 36 inches, so about 3 feet. And then you've got, you know, from front to back, I want to say it's about 30 inches. And here's, you know, a few photos of it. And you can see how huge it is. I think that the Jazz Inc. Batwing was about, I want to say closer to 4 feet, 4.5 feet. I'd have to look. That one's quite a bit bigger too. And, you know, I really don't have the space for that. I barely have the space for this. I'm going to make it work because it's awesome, but it's going to be to scale to the Batmobile that's up behind me. I don't know if you can see it back there. So he's got the lights for the wings. He's going to do a little, right where the controls are for his hands, there's a little screen, like a monitor there. He's going to put a light in there. And I don't think there's much room for lights on the sides where the buttons are and the little dash on the sides of where he sits, just because of how tiny they are. And there's just not enough space. And one thing I know he's been experimenting with was trying to get the windows perfect. You know, he got some translucent resin, printed them, and he said they looked great at first, which I agree. You know, he sent me a picture. But apparently after you do a cleaning of them, you wash them with alcohol or however it is, you know, I don't know the exact process. They lose their transparency quite a bit. They sort of get foggy. And I think he's tried a few different methods to try and get those perfect, and it hasn't really worked out. And I suggested maybe going the route of 3D printing professionally for the transparent parts. Of course, it costs a little bit. That's the downside, but they do look pretty good. And the tri-barrel gun that I have, the Alien Dome, was 3D printed on the side, and that's pretty much as good as it gets when it comes to transparent prints. It almost looks perfect. Has a little bit of like a, it's not that it's not clear at all, because that's not what I want to say, but you can definitely tell it's like a 3D printed clear piece of plastic, but it kind of looks cool. It's got a little sort of pattern to it in a way. I think we might end up 3D printing the cockpit pieces. There's 2 of those, and then there's the 2 clear pieces that go on the wings for those clear lights. I thought maybe they were opaque on the original model, but apparently they're actually quite clear, and you can see that. I'll put a picture of that up there. And we sort of, I think he's moved on to the painting stage now, or sort of experimenting with painting. He did like a gunmetal coat for the whole thing, and that was actually, I had suggested that because I loved the Prop Wiz. He had done his own Batwing. I think that was his name, Prop Wiz, and I love that video. He 3D printed one also. I think his is quite a bit bigger than mine. He had done a gunmetal layer for his first and then airbrushed the black, and I thought that looked awesome. Looks very close to the original models. So I think my dad ended up starting to go that route. And so he did the Rust-Oleum gunmetal, and I'll show you a photo of that. And he's kind of experimenting still. I know he had done that coating and noticed that there was some, you know, print lines still, so I think he was going to do some filler primer and try and get rid of those and eliminate them as best as he could. It's very tedious, that process, trying to get rid of those lines. I just sanded something recently that was a resin 3D print, and I had to do multiple coats of filler primer and sanding before I could really get rid of them. And even then, I feel like they're still, I mean, they are mostly gone on the piece I was working on, but it's just annoying having to like go back and sand, primer it again, especially in this weather. It's been very cold here on the coast, and not as cold as back east, but you know, as far as painting goes, if you're going to try and do any type of painting outside to let the paint dry, it doesn't work great when it's cold. You have to bring it inside. It's fumes. He's slowly working on getting the painting done, and hopefully we can get those transparent parts printed soon. I need to switch out my Batman's hands eventually, so he's got the fists right now, and we're going to have to switch those to the gloved hands so we can reach the controls in the Batwing. And I'm trying to figure out a way to build a stand that's kind of almost like angled like a sideways V to sort of hold it up with like a mount underneath. And I'll have to either attach the stand to my bookcase above me or get like some kind of weight to hold it down, because it's going to be sort of extended out past where the edge of my bookcase is, and I don't want to chance it falling. And that's sort of where we're at right now with it, though. He's been putting a lot of work into it. I know that he said connecting all of the parts together, you know, I think he said he needed a lot of filling and sanding. And one thing that you know, we both noticed is looking at the original model, there's only, I never realized this, but there's only one minigun on the Batwing, and it's on the left side of where he sits. If you're like looking at his point of view, it's on the left. But the Gambody files for the Batwing have 2 minigun spots, one on each side, so he's been trying to fill that in too and kind of blend it so that it looks more accurate to the original. He did, you know, printed up the little scissor pieces that cut the balloons in the movie, which is cool. And I'm just really excited. I can't wait to see how it turns out. It's kind of neat seeing all these pictures of it coming together, because then at the end you see the final product and you see how much work went into it, and it's just really cool. I will hopefully have a third video for you soon here, maybe after the painting process is done, and I'll go ahead and put a video that he sent me, you know, of his progress so far. This is pre-paint, but it kind of shows, you know, all the different stuff he's done to it and all the work he's put into it. So thanks, Pops. Appreciate it. You know I do, and I can't wait to see it. And don't forget to like and subscribe, and I will catch you guys for the next video.